Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and let's go ahead and talk about isometrics and Gainzzz. So let me put on my +5 hat of weaponsmithing, work on skilling up my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about this. I decided to make this video because I was just reading through my comments, and a little bit ago someone in the video comments had asked something like, hey, what do you think about isometrics and gaining size and strength? I mean, isn't that what old school strongmen did? And it's like, are you serious? All right, without even getting into the data, the scientific evidence, I want you guys to just step back and use some common sense. If isometrics were capable of stimulating the same muscle growth, let's not even get into strength, because that's a totally separate topic with joint angle specificities and things. If isometrics, and that means holding against force, so it's meaning no movement, muscles that just brace very, very hard against a weight to hold it, support it in some way. If isometrics were capable of producing the same amount of muscle growth that dynamic movements are, the only exercise you would probably ever need to do is deadlifts. In other words, deadlifts would be good enough to get most of you onto a bodybuilding stage. Heavy deadlifts would be the only hypertrophy exercise you really needed. In fact, a guy who had a 600-pound deadlift would probably have bodybuilder-sized biceps without ever doing a curl, a chin-up, a pull-up, anything else. Because if you think about the isometric tension that is put up on the bicep and the tricep on a heavy deadlift, 500-600-pound deadlifts, think about the isometric tension involved in the arms on that exercise. They would be able to maximize their arm development without doing a single curl, a single chin up, nothing. It wouldn't be necessary. You would have massive biceps just from that. How many guys who don't train their arms at all, who deadlift 500-600 pounds, do you know walking around with 18-inch, 19-inch biceps? Can you think of any off the top of your head, any of you? No, because isometrics do almost jack shit for hypertrophy. They help a little bit. I'm not gonna, that's an exaggeration, guys. Okay, that was me speaking in hyperbole for the millennials. They do stimulate some growth. And in fact, if a person did nothing but deadlift for a year straight as a total noob, and you measured their arm muscle with MRI or DEXA scan, you would probably see significant arm growth. However, someone who did nothing but curls and chin-ups for that year instead would have bigger biceps than the guy who did nothing but deadlift for a year. They would have bigger biceps. Why? Because dynamic movement recruits more muscle fibers. It recruits more muscle fibers. And, people look at stuff and say, well, these strongmen, they have big traps from doing all these weighted carries and loaded carries, and it's like, that's not why they have big traps. And I'm sorry, that should be common sense. A lot of people should be able to look at that and say, but these strongmen say that they feel they got growth out of it, or they believe that they did. But, by that same token, I could say that I believe that Zorgon, the turtle who lives inside of Lake Somerville, is the creator of the universe. Disprove me. Prove me wrong. You see the problem there? We've also got the weight of scientific evidence. We can look at also the way the body responds to training adaptation. We can look at muscle fiber recruitment. And we can objectively say that that is probably not the primary training stimulus for their traps. Did it possibly help with their traps a little bit? Meaning, did maybe 5 to 10% of their trap gains come from doing that? They very well may have. Where'd the rest come from? And I'm not saying the deadlift isn't a good trap exercise. The deadlift is an okay trap exercise with the isometrics involved. And what I've said before, people ask me on this, are like, what about these above the knee rack pulls? No, they're inferior for the traps. A deadlift off the floor should technically, even from an isometrics perspective, have more muscle fiber stimulation potential and recruitment potential than a rack pull does. And I've covered why in the past. I've covered why in detail. It's actually slightly better if that was your goal. But the point is, a deadlift is not a really good trap exercise any way you break it down. I don't care what sort of deadlift you're talking about. It's an okay trap stimulator. It's not a good trap stimulator. And a rack pull is slightly less good. What does Strongman do? Can you guys think of so they do deadlift, and the deadlifts do help. I mean, don't get me wrong. If you did nothing but deadlifts, again, just like with biceps, you would see trap growth. You would probably see more growth in your traps than you would in your biceps if you did nothing but deadlift for a year. But would you really maximize your trap growth? No, not really. What sort of exercises do we know really hammer traps? Well, shrugs, obviously. But a lot of strongmen don't do shrugs. But what other things do they almost all do? What do they have to do in competition? Do they have to press stuff over their head in competition? You guys ever seen any of the data on trapezius muscle fiber recruitment and overhead pressing? Particularly when you're forced to drive through. Not this seated stuff where you're back like this, doing an incline. No, I'm talking about when you have to lock it at the top and you have to drive your head forward and push the weight behind your head. Anyone ever seen the data on that? It's tremendous. How about rows? Rows are one of the premier trap exercises, particularly that whole middle trap down here, everything below, about the shoulder up here, all that going down your back. Rows are a massive trap builder. Not the upper as much, but the overhead press hammers the upper as hard, almost as hard as the shrug does. All these guys do rows. What else do they do? They all do cleans. Don't they have to clean and press in competition? How many of them train power cleans? Almost all of them. Don't power cleans work the traps? Hell yeah, they do. Power cleans work the entire trap. They work the entire trap. So you know these guys are deadlifting, overhead pressing, rowing, cleaning. And then they say, oh, I wonder they must have got the big traps from the farmers' carries. I mean, I'm sorry, but if you look at what they do and you use it basic anatomy and physiology and look at the other exercises they put a hell of a lot of work into, and you still can honestly believe that the farmers' walks are where they're really getting their traps from, and it's not just adding a little bit of extra icing on the cake. You know, it's just giving them a little bit of extra. That other stuff is where that growth is coming from. That's where 90% of their trap development is coming from. That the farmers carries they're adding just a little bit of extra stimulation in the form of isometrics. But isometrics do not work muscles as much as fuller range of motion. The longer the range of motion is, actually, the more muscle fiber recruitment potential you have. And that is as close to a scientific fact as we're going to get in exercise science. And pretty heavily supported by the data and basic function of muscles. And then we start talking about strength. Strength is joint angle specific. In other words, when you develop strength in a joint angle, like the bicep, top, middle, bottom, see it's moving, there's different joint angles involved, right? Strength transfer only transfers through 15 degrees, meaning maximum strength transfer. So if you double the strength of your bicep up here just doing isometrics, you're only going to get the strength gain through within 15 degrees from the top. So if you developed it right here, only about here you're still going to get the full strength gain in that muscle. And every bit you go lower, you're going to get a smaller and smaller percentage of the strength that you gained. In other words, isometric strength only partially carries over to the other joint angles other than right where you trained the isometrics at. Strength is very joint angle specific. You get some transfer. Don't get me wrong, guys. You will get some transfer. But it's not going to be a whole hell of a lot if you get to the other end of the range of motion. I mean, you start getting 45 degrees away from wherever you trained that strength gain, you're going to get very little. You're only going to get strength gain at that point based upon some of the muscle fiber hypertrophy that you got. For the muscle fibers that can even work it, because you need to remember at every single joint angle, there are muscle fibers in every muscle that only recruit in that part of the range of motion. There are some of them that can recruit all the way through, but in any given muscle there are joint angle specific fibers that really kind of only recruit at different points. And so if you're only hypertrophying a combination of the ones through a fairly shallow joint angle and then some of the ones that go through the rest of it, you're only going to get a little bit of strength transfer. It's not going to be tremendous. So when people start talking about isometrics and size and strength as far as your gains go, it's not a particularly great tool. I'm not saying it's useless. I'm not saying it's useless, but I think it's been heavily overrated by a lot of people. It helps a little bit, but as far as useful tools, it is way further down the list. It is further down the list as far as overall usefulness, and that just is what it is. Alright guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.